But I'm curious with this new Beowulf book, and just looking at this tale that is so old. I believe you, as well as Tolkien, place it at around the 8th century.
Yes.
And what is it about this tale that has this lasting power that, you know, people are still studying it and even doing new translations of it so long after the fact?
Well, for a start, it's kind of unique. You know, it's the only long narrative poem we have in Old English or in any early Germanic language, which is not a translation of something else. That's one thing. It's also, I think, I always say, it's a stratified poem. At bottom, in my opinion, there is an old fairy tale about the bear's son. And Beowulf is the bear's son. He's very like a bear. He's terribly strong. He fights hand to hand. He's a very good swimmer. When he was young, they thought he was a bit, the word the poem uses, slack, lazy maybe, unenterprising. But that's true of bears' sons as well, because they're not entirely human. Well, there's that fairy tale element. But the poet, I think, didn't really want that. He wanted it to be an aristocratic poem with a very strong sense of dignity and courtesy and proper behavior and all that kind of thing. And this is where I disagree with Tolkien. Well, I don't actually. I disagree with what Tolkien said, but I don't disagree with what Tolkien thought. Tolkien said in his famous lecture that you've got to stop thinking of the poem as just a historical document. And I quite see his point. People have been doing that for decades and got very silly about it. I won't go into that, but they got very, very silly about it. But actually, Tolkien took it quite seriously as a historical document. And long after 1936, other things came out which make it quite clear that he took it historically. And in a way, the poem then has its, you know, fight against Grendel, fight against Grendel's mother, fight against the dragon. But in between, there's a build-up, there's an interlude, there's a wind down. And all these are full of historical allusions. And I do wish, actually, I often wish this, I wish I could talk to Tolkien about it. Yeah. Because, you see, we've found things out that he didn't know about. He died 50 years ago. But since then, the poem has been actually, I think, rather surprisingly corroborated by archaeology. The thing about archaeology is, you know, they keep digging things up, and that's really sort of certainly altered my view on it. But it hasn't altered the view of the general public or most of the scholarly public. One thing, I just finished by saying one thing Tolkien said, which I thought was very, very astute. He said he thought the really original thing, the real stroke of genius by the Beowulf poet, was he set the poem at exactly the right time. And we can, in fact, date the setting of the poem pretty accurately, which you wouldn't expect, but we can. And it is set in the early years of the 6th century, which, as I put it somewhere or other, I say that was the time just before the roof fell in for Scandinavia. It was just before what my learned colleague, Professor Heskin, says was the cold decade. The cold decade when the sun didn't come through, where where the summers didn't happen, where the harvests were feeble, and when people died of hunger. And that was part of it, but it was only part of it because there was also failure in attempts to raid. That's one of the main events of Beowulf. And there's also, it appears, and again, the archaeology tends to confirm this, there was civil war all over Scandinavia, which is what happens, you know, when the resources run out.
Right.
They were all, anyway, so that I think gives us yet another perspective on the poem.